So do you have the sense that the tripping, you, on some level, are getting something done?
That tripping is getting something
done? Yes,
done?
that there's something being worked out, like continuously and progressively?
Yeah, I assume that basically the download called history, meaning all the technology, social innovation, philosophy, art, fashion, architecture, is some kind of dialogue with this, well, higher mind. I'm not entirely comfortable with that, but this higher mind that keeps showing these different facets through the mist. I mean, that science and psychedelic and all this is a dialogue with the mathematical deep structure of nature. And that somehow as you get that out, there's this sense of progress, more than a sense of progress. And I don't... And, in terms of what is it all leading toward or what it's about, it must be something about like the spiritualization of matter. That matter is evolving toward quintessence or essence or something like that. And, we're the startled witnesses to this thing because we're part of this stuff that I called emergent properties, or, the side effects, you could almost say, of the universal emergence of matter into spirit. Because that's what biology is. I mean, I think biology is the quantum mechanical magnification of uncertainty into macrophysical space, so that essentially we're chemical systems that by some means yet to be understood amplify quantum mechanical uncertainty into dimensions such as we see, and that permits these emergent properties and systems and morphologies to show themselves. And that's the trick, or that's the trick explained on one level.
It's funny, when in your raps you stay away from what to a lot of people would consider spirituality. In a way, like the way that somebody would present their Jewish spirituality or kind of Buddhist practice or whatever. You don't talk. In fact, often you sort of like you slag the guru model, and you kind of separate yourself from that, and you really have a kind of like you've maintained the sort of I don't want to quite characterize it right now, but and yet at points obviously you are motivated by something that in your own language you would call spiritual.
Well,
what comes up around that word?
I guess I believe I'm some form of progressive history, that history is progressive. So then the story of evolution and biology and human culture and all this is assumed to be a story with a happy ending. So in a way, this belief in telos, which is not philosophically sanctioned, or this eschatological vein in my personality, is what gives it a spiritual impulse. But it's the idea that time, it's an alchemical idea actually, it's the idea that time will perfect matter. And I think it probably will perfect matter.
What do you think about, do you think that like postmodern spirituality is a sort of legitimate term or project?
You mean to believe or involve yourself in, or
believe? It's not really about belief. I mean that whatever the kind, there's a lot of people now who are developing a relationship with all different kinds of spiritual practice, and they're not really doing it even in the way that people did in the 70s where there was so much more true believing. It's a different kind of relationship.
It's probably on a short spin, a short cycle, that a lot of empiricists are taking up Dzogchen, and that how long can that go on? So then there'll be a lot of revisionism and rethinking and recasting of all this, which is the very best thing for it.
Yes, it is. So were you ever very interested in meditation or yoga?
When I was in India, and immediately before I went to India, when I was in the Seychelles the first time, I was, because when I was in Mombasa, Kenya, I came upon this place called I can't remember. Anyway, it was a library that was basically having a bargain sale in theosophical literature. So I took about 50 kilos of yogic Arthur Avalon theosophical literature with me to the Seychelles. And that was what I read and worked through when I was out there.
How is it that you relate to mysticism, to mystical experience?
Oh, you mean as a source of valid data about what's going on?
Not even that far. I mean, that's one way of saying, of judging it in one way or another, and it doesn't necessarily be valid data. It's just, I mean, you've been interested. I mean, this library, obviously, mysticism is completely surrounding us.
Well, I guess I would say the more personal the mystical indicator is, probably the more likely I am to take it seriously. In other words, it seems to me, if you extrapolate your mystical insight beyond the personal, you probably enter into the domain of inflation, of some kind of psychological inflation. And
so was Plato inflated?
Was Plato inflated? No, probably not, but he probably gets a pass as some kind of pioneer.
You could just start out by talking about the relationship between technology and shamanism.
Well, you remember Iliad's basic book, which is Shamanism, the Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy. That book was originally written in French, and in French, as I don't have to tell you, the word technique has this dual meaning of both a way to do something and a technology. So, from Iliad's point of view, shamanism was always about using techniques to achieve these, what he called ruptures of plane. And these ruptures of plane were these breakthroughs into these healing spaces. And for him it was always drugs, yoga, or ordeal, or maybe yoga / ordeal. So in a way, pushing on the frontier of language and pushing on the frontier of technique always brought some form of breakthrough. I mean, I suppose the perfect example would be fire, where fire must have been something. We talked about the Smith thing yesterday. But so fire technology, the transformation, the visible transformation of materials through heat, and all of that leads straight into better weapons, stronger building materials, and so forth.
So, I mean, do you see then that even though the West turns away from the worldview of pre-modern the enchanted universe, is that there's still something in that process of technological development which is linked to those older technologies?
Well, the way chips are made and the way solid state objects are assembled often is just a matter of bringing a mix of materials to a certain temperature and a certain proportion of materials, and then standing back and letting the laws of physics rearrange the atoms so that electricity or information or something flows through this in an unexpected way. So I think we're still involved in discovering what can be coaxed from the physical world just by letting physical laws unravel themselves.
And that seems to you connected with an old the operation of doing that goes farther back than just modern science.
Yeah, at low temperatures it's about psychoactive drugs and brewing and combining biological materials, and then at higher temperatures it becomes about this other thing.
And one of my alchemical readings of modernity is that electricity is a kind of element in the old sense of element, and that it has certain properties that evolve as you develop almost a shamanic relationship with it, in the sense of using it and developing a relationship with electrical potentials. And that sets up that interjects a kind of life into the human organism that fundamentally changes it, because it's introducing this element of electricity which has certain properties of communication. I mean, electricity is very strange. It's pretty far out stuff. You just laid out like electricity to somebody and just kind of said, these are how these fields work, and they're not actually da-da-da-da. It's like total science fiction. We're just sort of used to that story. Right. But it's an amazing thing, and those potentials are being then introduced into human communication. So that fundamentally changes them, and I think spiritualism is like a reflection in the archetypal imagination of modernity about the kind of communication that is introduced by electricity.
Interesting. It's sort of, McLuhan had this idea about the third person of the Trinity, the Holy Ghost, was electricity, and the covering of the earth by the matrix of the Holy Ghost had initiated the third world age and all this.
Right, and that picks up a line of thought that's been carried through since it first starts. I mean, the idea of electricity is born in an alchemical imagination. It's born at a point to the sort of Royal Society break, or whatever you want to call the genuine scientific transformation that split alchemy into the shadow realm of culture. But it comes up in that alchemical matrix.
In Mason-Dixon, there are scenes in Philadelphia in the 1770s in coffee houses where electricity is being sold as a drug. You pay your money and then you grab onto this thing and they rip this thing around until it throws you off, and you pick yourself up off the floor and then go back and pay again and get more. Just this insane scene.
It's funny to say that, but you look at 20th century science, and even though its story has nothing to do with alchemy, that it really is this kind of fulfilling of visionary notions about the way that matter and energy and mind could be stitched together.
Well, and it turns out it's all true. I mean, what 20th century science proved is you can actually do almost anything. And so, you want to change lead to gold, you want to create life, you want to store information in crystals, all these things. It's now come to pass, and much, much more besides, proving that matter is really magical material that you can pull off all these tricks with.